I want to now look at a specific institution which was very important in the lives of many women, certainly the highest ranked among the samurai women, to give a sense of how what exactly did it mean to grow up in such a patriarchal society and to function in it as a powerful samurai woman. This institution that I want to look at is something called the Ooku, the Great Interior. It's a combination of two Chinese characters, O and Oku, the Great Interior. By the way, one of the other, sexist ways to, sexist but completely conventional ways to refer to a wife in Japan is an oksan, a woman of the interior, or a person of the interior. Which this you can see how these kind of cultural attitudes perpetuate themselves. But basically, the Ooku is the great interior, and what is it? It is literally an area in a palace compound, in a mansion that is reserved for a bunch of very, very high-ranking women. Now, it started out as an area in Edo Castle that was reserved for the shoguns. Some people call it a harem, but it's not actually a harem. It's an area of the castle that is reserved for all of the shogun's female relatives. This was the great interior, the Ooku. Every samurai house of means, that is basically every fairly elite samurai house, had an Oku area for women, had a interior area for women, usually literally towards the back of the compound, farthest away from the gate and people coming in and out of the compound. But, since the shogun was the shogun, he added O, the prefix which basically meant great, used to distinguish his Oku from the other samurai's Oku. But as time went on, more and more daimyo appropriated the prefix O for their Oku as well, and this kind of became an open secret where the shogun knew that his daimyo were doing this back in the domain, but he decided not to make an issue of it unless or if the daimyo never used this term publicly outside of their domains. Once again, one of these Omote and Naisho compromises. What was the Ooku? Well, it was an area that was locked, that was technically sealed off from the outside world, and women had to get permission to leave this area, certainly to leave the castle. They definitely had to give permissions. Men could not enter this area without the shogun, although there were exceptions at times. And I've mentioned earlier this very interesting power player in the late 18th century, Tanuma Okitsugu, who used his position as chamberlain, as the chief of the shogun's household, to build alliances with women in the Ooku because he had physical access to them. There were some other types of men who could come and go. Priests, for example. Here we see a Buddhist priest reading a book. They're supposed to be chaste. Although, to share just a wonderful piece of Japanese culture with you, priests had a reputation during the Edo period as just these severely closeted sex freaks. In many cases they had this reputation. Certainly here we see echoes of some people's views of religious establishments during our period today. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Priests were certainly not supposed to be engaging in sexual activity. Although in modern Japan they can. In modern Japan, priests can marry and have families and are actually expected to do so because Buddhist priesthoods are passed down through the family in Japan today. They are kind of in the same boat as other cultural specialists, performers of No, for example, or kabuki actors, who are very conscious, and martial arts experts, passing the dojo down from generation to generation. And the same was seen as priests are seen as the same way. Little digression, but interesting, don't you think? Anyway, this Ooku could become a site for political action because all of the relatives of the shogun or of the great daimyo who were living here, all of these women, were certainly, they maintained connections with people outside. The nieces and aunts of the shogun, the daughters of the shogun, were very important political players if they chose to assert themselves and if they were in an ooku in which they could assert themselves. In some ways, it was kind of not too dissimilar from other relatively closed systems such as prison, where you have these kinds of shifting alliances, and depending on the personalities of the people who are kind of locked in with you, you may be able to get your voice across, or you may be able to get people to respect you or fear you or whatever, and you could manipulate people on the outside in order to help you as well. The ooku always had one person in charge, and this was often, but not necessarily, the oldest woman there, and often, but not necessarily, the primary, the wife of the shogun, basically. But especially concerning the shogun's ooku, but also, and to a lesser degree, for some of the daimyo ooku, this was a very interesting kind of environment where it was officially managed by a branch of the government bureaucracy, and so it was a very kind of interesting liminal space between public and private in samurai life, and mediated by women. It was kind of a unique setting. Basically, not far from every samurai household had one of these. This is, as I said, a feature of very elite samurai life, but to a lesser degree, some of the things that happened in the ooku were mirrored in the households of other samurai, who maybe did not physically constrain their womenfolk in an area inside their mansion, but who nevertheless had a community of women living in the mansion, which had a life of its own, and certainly was influential in its own way, in the same way that these bigger ooku may have been. Very interesting kind of an institution.